Welcome to the Go Find Out podcast. I'm Jennifer Jelliff Russell, author, speaker, and entrepreneur, bringing you actionable ideas and interviews with awesome women to help you pursue your dreams and achieve your goals. You can find more episodes of the Go Find Out podcast by visiting gofindoutpodcast.com. Enjoy the show and go find out. Welcome back to the Go Find Out podcast. I'm your host, Jennifer Jelliff Russell, and this is episode number 47. On today's show, I interview creative entrepreneur Joanna Penn about her journey of becoming a best-selling author of thrillers and nonfiction after initially starting out as a business IT consultant. But first, let's jump into my personal update. Hey listeners, I know that it's only been like 2 weeks since I released the last episode, but it feels like forever, doesn't it? Maybe it has something to do with how time seems to work differently in a global pandemic. I don't know. So just a quick update. I've definitely stayed quite busy for the last 2 weeks and was able to launch book 3 in the Artemis necklace series. It's titled Go Magic Yourself. I also made book 1 in the series completely free on all ebook platforms. So if you would like to give it a try, you can visit your virtual bookstore of choice and look up Suck It, the Artemis necklace series, book 1 by J.J. Russell. You know, if you like urban fantasy with a snarky female protagonist and a hellhound with an attitude, definitely download it for free today from any ebook store of your choice. And if you like spicy romance, hang tight because I am currently wrapping up a second round of edits on my contemporary spicy romance, and then it's off to my editor for proofreading. So I'm kind of looking at maybe a mid-May release. I still don't have an official title for that yet, but it's coming. Things are also beginning to get busy on the farm front, so I have almost all of my seedlings started, which is always super exciting. And we have had a few beautiful days here in Down East Maine. But of course, this is the spring of deception, right? That's what they call it here. It's April 17th as I record this, and we actually just had some snow this morning. So the spring of deception is hopefully over, and now we can kind of start slowly moving into the real spring. It'll be a little bit longer before it's actually safe to transplant any of the seedlings to our field outside. But I guess that just means I'll have to start some more seedlings. Terrible, right? All right, that is all I've got for an update. Let's go ahead and jump into the interview with creative entrepreneur Joanna Penn. Today, I'm speaking with creative entrepreneur Joanna Penn. Joanna is a New York Times and USA Today best-selling author of thrillers and nonfiction. She also hosts the Creative Penn podcast, which focuses on writing, publishing, book marketing, and helping authors make a living with their writing. But Joanna actually started her career as a business IT consultant, and today we'll be focusing on her journey from the IT world to becoming a full-time author. Welcome to the show, Joanna.
Oh, thanks for having me, Jennifer. I'm really happy to be here.
Yeah, I'm super stoked to have you on. As we were chatting a moment before, I'm going to try not to fangirl because I'm a big fan. So, and now I know we just touched a little bit on your career highlights, but can you tell us a little bit more about yourself, like where you're from and, how you actually initially started out as a business IT consultant?
Sure. Well, as people can probably hear from my accent, I'm British and I live in the southwest of England in Bath, which many people might also know from, from Regency romance. That's how people often see the Bath architecture. In fact, some of Bridgerton was filmed here, so people can get that. Yeah, exactly. Get that in your head. I didn't see many of the exciting actors when it got filmed, but no, I'm sure everyone knows that series now. But so I live here, and in terms of how I became an IT consultant, I went to Oxford University and I did a master's degree in theology, as in religion, which is kind of crazy and ends up now a lot in my fiction. But what happens when you go to Oxford is you get recruited into consulting, banking, and law are sort of the big careers in order to pay off your student loan and all that type of thing. So I went into consultancy. I started working at a place called Accenture, and essentially on the first morning I went in and there were sort of 400 of us graduates starting that day. And the woman at the front held her arm out down the middle of this hall and she said, everyone on my left, which I was there, she's like, you are now doing SAP, which is this German software system which is put into large companies. And that was it. I was just sitting on the side of the room that got me into SAP financials consulting. So essentially I worked for 13 years implementing financial systems into really big multinational companies and also small companies, and paid very, very well. It was the classic corporate golden handcuffs. And in your work with career coaching, I'm sure you know the people who work in corporates and end up miserable.
Yes, yes. I actually just spoke to an ex-Googler about the same thing in the
Oh, well,
corporate
there you go.
handcuffs. So, yeah, yeah. And so you said you did that for 13 years. At what point did you start to kind of feel that itch to write a book?
Well, it wasn't so much writing a book at the time, as in I left that job many times. I
Mm.
resigned over and over again. And always had to go
Right.
back. So I started a scuba diving business. I started a travel itinerary business. I started renovating houses. I tried so many times to leave that career. And
Mhm.
I mean, again, you know this, I couldn't find what fitted with what I wanted to do. Like every time I'd be like, well, this isn't it. And I would go back to my day job. And
Mhm.
because they kept paying me, and it was like, okay, well, I'll take that. I'll take that, the side I don't like, because it pays for the rest of my life. But what happened, I guess, sort of my early 30s, things sort of started to get really bad. I was just really miserable. I was kind of crying at work, going, what am I doing? The thing in IT, IT systems, is the moment you implement something and it goes live and people start using it, they come up with another plan and everything you do gets overwritten. So it's like, okay, well, this is pointless. And so I felt like everything I did was just in service of the mortgage and, investments and all the things they tell you have to do. And I just wasn't happy. So that was sort of 2006. I was like, okay, I have to figure this out. I have to figure out what to do with my life. And in fact, the first book I wrote is called Career Change. And
Mm.
I
Mhm.
wrote that book in order to figure out what I wanted to do with my life. And so I read loads of self-help books, a lot of American self-help books. You guys are brilliant at self-help. And
We
I
need all the help we can get. That's
yeah,
right.
well, you help a lot of other people. And I was like, okay, well, I'm very good at studying. I like to study. And I was like, I do like to write, but maybe I'll study how to change my career, and I'll write a book, because in writing a book I'll be able to help myself. And
Mhm.
in writing that book has changed a few lives, but the life it mostly changed was my own, because I wrote that book and discovered the world of writing books and publishing and marketing, and started blogging and podcasting and all these things. And so it was deciding to change my career and then writing a book that actually did change my career. It's one of those, I say to people, it's a bit like skiing down a slope. You don't just aim your skis and end up in a straight line from the top to the bottom. It's like you have to start doing something. And in doing something, you learn enough to change direction. And then you're like, okay, this isn't quite right, change direction. And I started writing a book not in order to become a full-time writer. I didn't really know that that was a possibility, but I started in order to figure out my life and to help others. And then along the way, since then, so 2006, I started writing. 2008, I published that first book, started my blog. 2009 started my podcast, and wrote more books, obviously. And in 2011, I left my job to do this full time. So it still took 5 years of writing and doing all the things to leave my job. But we're now at almost a decade
Oh,
of
wow.
full time author entrepreneur, as I call myself.
And so, with that very first book that you wrote, what was that process like to be published? Because that was sort of a different time, kind of before things really started booming, right, with the indie author scene.
Oh yes, there really wasn't much. The phrase indie author wasn't really known,
Right.
but what was interesting. So I have always been a businesswoman. So my single mum was in business, and so I always knew I didn't want to be poor. That was very important to me, that I
Hmm.
made good money. So when I wrote this book, I did then look at what traditional publishing involved. And again, this was 2007, 2008, and before the Kindle took off, before the iPhone took off, all of these types of things. And I just couldn't see a way that getting a publisher would be a good choice for me, because I'm very entrepreneurial. I do not like asking permission. I was like, why do I have to go ask these people to look at my book? Why do I have to do that? I think I'm just going to do it myself. So I also at the time was doing a lot of public speaking, and getting training with the National Speakers Association, and all of the speakers have been self-publishing for a long time, because they know that they can sell books at the back of the room.
Mm-hmm.
So I was like, oh, well, I'll do this too. I mean, all you need is some formatting and a printer and all of this type of thing. So that's what I did. I actually self-published before before it became trendy, and obviously learned a lot along the way. And although now I do have various publishing deals with foreign rights publishers mainly, I can make 70 to 90% royalties by doing it myself. So as a businesswoman, I made that choice early, and I still make that choice. Although, the inevitable thing is, as soon as you can do it yourself, other people are more interested in,
Right,
in
helping you
helping
out.
you do it.
Of course. And so when you first were kind of like, okay, I'm going to make a go of this, like I am going to turn this into a full-time, business. Did you have any naysayers when you told people that you were going to do this and pursue being at that time self-published, but now indie author, right?
Well, again, when I decided to go to leave my job, it wasn't I'm going to leave my job and write books.
Hmm.
It was I'm going to leave my job and become mainly a speaker,
Mm-hmm.
because the people, for some reason, when you say I'm going to be a professional speaker, people don't think that that's a bad thing.
Right.
Compared to if you say you're going to quit your job and be a writer, people are like, oh, well, you're never going to make any
Right.
money. Exactly. But basically, I always intended to have multiple streams of income.
Hmm.
I know, and I still know, I have over 30 books, and I make good money with my book sales. But if that was my only income, I would not be a happy entrepreneur. So I have multiple streams and have done from day one. So I set up the creativepen.com. I immediately started building an email list. I was taking training courses about how to make money with blogging
Mm.
at the time, and then how to make money with podcasting. So things like affiliate links, selling other people's products. I set up my first online course before 2009. Now everyone's doing it,
Right.
obviously, because of the pandemic.
Mhm.
But now I started teaching online. I started running my own events, charging people to come. I did my first events at libraries. I was living in Australia at the time. So I had all of these different income streams. I set up a YouTube channel. I had all these things coming in, and it was little trickles at first, like $10 here and $20 there, and maybe $500 to do, a full day workshop, because I wasn't charging much at the time.
Right.
But then, and I was doing this while still doing my day job, and my husband was very supportive, but he didn't necessarily see it as going anywhere, because I was at the time a highly paid consultant. But then it got to the point where I was making probably about $1,500 a month,
Mm-hmm.
which is not enough for most of us to live on, right? But it was evidence that I could make some money.
Right.
So at that point, I said to my husband, look, I think I could make more if I had more time. So if I actually left my job. And so we agreed that we would downsize for a start, because I did earn more money at the time than him. So we would downsize, and we sold our house and all of that. And I would give it 6 months. And also we had saved extra money, in case anything went wrong. And I said, if I do it for 6 months and it just is going nowhere and I can't grow this number, then I'll go back to work. And of course, that didn't need to happen. So that's really good. But in terms of naysayers, coming back to your question, I'm very blessed. In my mum is incredibly enthusiastic about anything, and she's always taught me and my brother that anything you decide to do, you can achieve. And again, very American, self-helpy. So yeah, I feel like my mum has always supported that kind of decision. And in terms of naysayers, it was probably just my own mind more than anything else. But yeah, over the years, I guess I've continued to prove that idea wrong, that you have to be the poor author in the garret or whatever.
Mm. One of the things we've been speaking about is really more on the nonfiction side of the house. And you've actually mentioned on your podcast that you weren't sure that you could write fiction, but now you have 19 thrillers under your belt, if my count is right. What actually convinced you to try your hand at fiction?
Well, it's actually my podcast. So there's a little warning for you, because someone might say something on your show and you're like, oh, I'm really challenged by that. And that's basically what happened. So it was it was 2009. So I was only about 6 months into my podcast, and I interviewed a guy called Tom Evans about writer's block. And I was like, oh, I don't have any blocks. I just write stuff. And he's like, no, I think you have a block around writing fiction. And I was like, oh, I'm so challenged by it, because I've always been a reader. I love to read all the time. And I had thought that writing fiction was something that certain special people did,
Mm.
only people who the muse came down and sort of magic streamed out of their fingertips. And when when he challenged me on it, I was like, do you know what, I think I might actually have some blocks around fiction, because again, because of going to sort of a university that values literature, and my mum also taught English literature, and I thought, well, I have to write some kind of literature. I have to write literary fiction, prize winning fiction. That's the only acceptable type of book, which is obviously wrong, because as a miserable person in sort of the corporate world, I used to binge read thrillers all the time. Like, what I would do at lunchtime is I'd go to the bookstore. This was, when books were only in print, and I would buy hardback thrillers and I would read them, and that's what I loved. Dan Brown's Da Vinci Code sort of really tapped into my interest in religion, which is, what my degree was in. And I was like, well, maybe I could write something like a Dan Brown. And because it's sort of still interesting and has a lot
Hmm.
of research, which I love, but it's the type of book I really love to read. So I did NaNoWriMo. If your audience don't know, that's National Novel Writing Month. You can find it at nanowrimo.org. And that's every November. It's a challenge to write 50,000 words in the month of November. So you have to write something like 1,400 words a day or something to make the goal. And I was like, right, I'll do that, see what happens. And I managed to write about 20,000 words that month, and of which about 5,000 words became the seed of what became my first novel, Stone of Fire,
Mm.
which originally had a different title. But that in writing that book, and it took me sort of another 14 months or something, that came out in 2011 after I'd learned a lot about editing and all those things. But what I love about writing both nonfiction and fiction is it is two very different sides of me. And as you said, I mentioned I write thrillers under J.F. Penn, and I'm able to keep that sort of self-helpy side, the American self-help side, as Joanna Penn, and then I'm able to go sort of deeper into a lot of the things I'm interested in. A lot of my travels go into my fiction, a lot of my darker side, and I love writing both. And so
Mm-hmm.
I guess what started me was that challenge, and then what made me continue was the fact that I love the creative process. And sort of circling back to what I said at the beginning about things being overwritten in the corporate world and things not lasting, and now
Hmm.
I measure my life by what I create. And the wonderful thing about fiction is, of course, it doesn't really age. I mean, a book is new for whoever finds it. So maybe someone listening now will find my novel Desecration, for example, which is one of my favorite books, and go, oh, well, there you go. And that's new to that person, even though I wrote it sort of 7 years ago or something. And whereas nonfiction can age a lot more if you include technical things in it, or like podcasting or blogging has changed a lot since I first
Hmm.
started, over a decade ago. So yeah, I think it's, if people listening do want to write fiction, I mean, you've written fiction too. You write stories as well as nonfiction. It's a
Hmm.
very different skill. There's a lot of different things to learn, but it's a craft. You can do it for the rest of your life, and there'll always be challenges in story. Whereas I feel like with nonfiction, uh, you can write a nonfiction book, like especially in the self-help genre. If you have something you want to share, you can structure it and write it. But I feel like fiction, you have so much more to learn. If you get, do you feel the same, because you've written both?
I do. I feel like on the nonfiction side, there's more research involved. I feel like fiction can be harder because for me, it's all made up worlds, right?
Oh well,
Because mine is on the
not.
fantasy side.
Oh yeah, true. I mean, mine is, I write a lot of fantasy, but most of it's not made up.
Mhm.
It's like based in my Matt Walker series is dark fantasy set in another world, but
Mm,
all of the places are based on places in our
actual
world.
locations.
Yeah,
Right.
so I love research, is my favorite thing, and I research the hell out of my fiction.
Right. I mean, it lets you travel, so why would you not?
Exactly. Yeah.
And so, what would you say has been your biggest challenge in being kind of an indie author, kind of overall?
I mean, there are creative challenges, there are business challenges, but I like a challenge. So they come along, I do them, and I move on. I don't
Hmm.
necessarily dwell on things. I mean, everything's a challenge. It's a challenge to write your words. I don't write
Hmm.
every day, but actually this morning I wrote nearly 3,000 words.
Oh,
And
nice.
yeah, I mean, but I haven't written first draft words for months. And so, getting to the page is a challenge. Managing your time is a challenge for all of us.
Hmm.
Book marketing is a big challenge for any author, but not just for any author, for any small business. I mean, for your, resume business, for example, your challenges of marketing that business are exactly the same as an author trying to market a book. There are a lot of people out there selling their services, and you have to stand out somehow. So I think probably marketing is one of the biggest challenges that anyone has in a small business, and authors are just another small business, basically.
Yeah, and that's kind of one of my next questions was, what that entails. And you've mentioned a few of the items that are included with running an indie author, a small business. Are there other aspects that you have found to running a small business besides, the writing and marketing side of it?
Well, I think, I mean, there's a book called The E-Myth, which has been famous for many years. And it's sort of, you can be a good practitioner at your craft. So I can be as good a writer as I can try and be. I can do all the courses, I can hire all the editors, and my book can be a brilliant book. But it still, people are like, oh, quality books will find the way, but actually it's not true. There is something like 10 million books or something on Amazon, with hundreds of thousands published every month, and there are lots of good books that never find an audience because of the business side. So I think it needs to be both. And again, this is why being an indie author, or being an author in general, actually is no different to running another business. So you have to change your mindset from I am an artist to I am running a business. So I
Right.
put my artist aside and I put my business hat on, and it says, okay, so now I need quality products. So I need to hire, obviously, an editor. I need to hire a cover designer. I need to get my book onto all the publishing platforms. So I need to make the most of my product.
Hmm.
And then, of course, I do need to do marketing and all the things associated with that. Then even things like email. It's funny. So my husband works in a pharmaceutical company, and he's like, oh, I've got so much email. I'm like, yeah, tell me about it. I mean, I get so much email every day, and we all have email as part of our job. That's just the way it goes. And when you're a full-time author, part of your job is dealing with email from readers, or dealing with incoming things like this. You emailed me and said, would you come on my show? And I was like,
Hmm.
yeah, that would be great. And so scheduling meetings, this is a meeting, we put it in the calendar. And or maybe I'm speaking at an event on Zoom or in real life when we're able to do that again. And then of course there's managing the money, and this is a huge part of running your own business.
Hmm.
That can be the thing that really goes horribly wrong for people, which is cash flow. So you have to have money coming in, and there's always money going out. As you know, you have to do all these, you have to pay all the people you need to pay, you need to do the marketing, and then hopefully you're taking a salary. And where I am now, with over a decade, or nearly a decade full time, is putting money aside into a pension or superannuation, investments, all the things you would do when you have a normal job, you need to do when you run a business, but you actually need to do it yourself instead of or hire people to help you. Obviously, I don't do my own payroll, for example. I have an accountant and bookkeeper, and I don't do my own cover design, I don't do my own editing as such. So I have lots of people to help me, but all of those people are generally helping me on the business side, whereas the
Hmm.
craft side is me. I write all my own words. I have co-written some books, but I don't outsource my writing. And
Right.
I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. There are plenty of people who work with ghostwriters and things like that, or are ghostwriters. But part of why I do this is because I'm a writer.
Right.
so, so I think, in general, the most important thing is to understand that you have your craft, which is your writing, or maybe you're a painter or whatever you're doing, and then you have your business. I
Hmm.
mean, the same for you, with the resumes. Writing someone's resume is one thing,
Hmm.
and then advertising your business and doing marketing is something you have to do, or
Right.
chasing up accounts receivable or all of those things. So in my head, it's better to keep the two things separate. And I tend to do in the mornings, I'm a writer, I'm an artist, and in the afternoons, I'm a businesswoman. You're talking to the businesswoman.
Right. Gotcha. No, I completely understand. That's something I've spoken about on this podcast before. Is I tend to separate my day. In the morning, I'm creative, and in the afternoon, that's when I have to put on my entrepreneur hat and do the business side.
Yeah, exactly. And that's how you can do this for the long term. I've known many writers now since I started in 2006, and so many of them have left the industry because it's hard, it's difficult, and many of or it's just not them. And so what do you want to do with your life? And there's nothing wrong with writing one book and then deciding that's not your thing.
Right.
My dad wrote a thriller a few years back and then decided he really didn't enjoy it, so he's a printmaker. And and that was a retirement project anyway. And plenty of people go back to a day job or have a day job while they write, or like you, for example, you're not trying to make a full-time living with your fantasy fiction, as far as I can see at the moment.
That's the long-term goal.
Right, but at the moment you've got a lot of other things going on that are what earn you money while you write, and
exactly.
that is as I did for 5 years or whatever. And that's an important part of it. But yeah, I think that's the most important thing, is separating your artist and your business person.
Yes, absolutely. Do you think that you have any specific habits that have helped you to be successful in building your author business?
I think I do love learning. Like I said, I love researching for my books, but I love learning new things. And if you are not learning new things, you are not going to be successful as possibly anything. I mean, that the world is moving so fast. And in order to keep up with what's going on, you need to be able to learn new stuff, and you need to be able to adapt what you're doing to change direction, potentially to add new forms of income, to retire older forms of income, and that's a form of resilience, I guess. And so I think, is it a habit or more of a sort of a personality trait that you acquire over time, which is that persistence? And yeah, persistence and learning are probably the things that I sort of credit for where I am now, because I've never had a breakout success. I've never had like a massive month of income with a huge extra amount of money or anything. I've actually steadily grown what I earn, and it's been pretty steady now for a few years. It's a pretty good level. So it's all just been consistently working on the craft and the business almost every day,
Right.
actually, for as long as I've been doing this. And I guess coming back to sort of being miserable in my day job at the beginning, which is I'm grateful every day that I don't have to go back.
Right.
So yeah, it's definitely one of those weird things that if you love what you do, you're not thinking about work-life balance, or you're not thinking about, oh, seem to be spending too much time on my day job, although I do think that sometimes. But it's more like I love what I do now, and so I'm not measuring that. But yeah, this is a long-term game. If people listening, if you want to be a writer, it is a long-term game. There is no overnight success. Anyone you see who's an overnight success has probably been writing under another name for at least a decade.
Right. Or they just appear to be an overnight success because that's the book that
Exactly.
just happened to hit big. Right.
Yeah, exactly.
And so I think you've touched on a few things, but what would you say is kind of the one piece of advice that you would give to someone interested in becoming an indie author?
Oh, so many
I
things.
know. I mean, it's not like you have 10 years of podcasting where you're talking about this. I mean,
No, exactly, in a whole load of books
Right.
where you can learn it all. No, well, I think the main thing is, what is your definition of success? Because if you want to win the Pulitzer Prize, then you're better off being traditionally published, or spending a long time in academia and working with the people who can help you play that game. I decided I wanted to make six figures, and multi six figures. The money was definitely a thing that I wanted to get first, because I wanted to leave my job. So I was like, I want to make the money. And that's what led me into becoming an independent author, because I could see a guaranteed way to make money that way. by producing quality products that people wanted to buy for a specific audience. I was like, okay, I know how that works. Whereas the traditional publishing trajectory is not at all under your control. It's all out of your control, actually. I mean, you can write an incredible book. You can spend a couple of years getting an agent. You might take another year or so to get a publishing deal. That book may, turn you into George R.R. Martin, or it might disappear off the face of the earth.
Mm-hmm.
Although we should say, with someone like George Martin, he has been writing for something like 50 years, and he only became George R.R. Martin in the last sort of decade, as people were like, oh, Game of Thrones. Oh, now he makes. I think he came to mind because I just saw he got an 8-figure
I
deal
saw
for.
that.
You saw that, yeah.
Yes.
And it's like, okay, well, he spent. If people are interested, look at his career. He was no one, and he was no one, and he was no one, and then suddenly he was George Martin.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, okay, well, who knows? Maybe that will happen to me in another 25 years. But you can't bet on that. You can't bet on having the Game of Thrones. But what you can do as an independent author is write the books you love, publish them, promote yourself, your books to readers, and you will grow a career. And so I think I just prefer, my definition of success is around making a living and living the way I want to live,
Mm-hmm.
as opposed to chasing a lightning strike, or playing the literary lottery. But not to say that I won't ever do that. It's just that up until this point, when we're talking, I haven't gone that way. But yeah, so if you are listening and you're interested in becoming an indie author, then deciding on your definition of success is very, very important, because you have to decide what your validation is. If you really want Penguin Random House on the spine of your book, then go for that. If you really, really want an agent, then go for that. And if you want to make 6 figures, then you can go for that too. And do you want that within your control, or more of a luck, I guess? So yeah, it's a big question, I know. And also I would say a lot of people don't necessarily know what their definition of success is, but that is all part of the fun and games of being a writer.
Right. And listeners, if you are interested in becoming an indie author, you should definitely check out Joanna's book, Successful Self-Publishing: How to Self-Publish an Ebook, Printbook, and Audiobook. And it's actually available for free on your website, right, Joanna?
Yeah, not just on the website. It's free on all ebook platforms. So you can get it free everywhere where you get your ebooks.
Perfect. And where can we learn more about you and your podcast and your books?
Right, so my website is thecreativepenn.com, pen with a double N, and you can get there. I've got a free author blueprint, and also my books are all there, linked there, and my podcast is The Creative Penn Podcast, again, pen with a double N. And if you're into books and travel, I have another podcast called Books and Travel, which is a kind of a passion project, but that's what I love. So yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, thank you for coming on. It was such a fun interview. While I was editing it, I was actually laughing out loud while re-listening to our conversation. I hope you guys enjoyed hearing about Joanna's journey to becoming an indie author as much as I did. There were so many great takeaways from the interview today, but one that really stood out to me was when Joanna said that to be successful, really in any business or endeavor, you have to be willing to learn new things. I think this is such a huge point. It's so easy to get stuck in our own comfort zones and just kind of keep plodding away, doing things the same way, simply because that's the way we've always done it. But sometimes when we stick our heads in the sand and ignore new options or new technology, we kind of shoot ourselves in the foot by not at least trying it out. As an example, I stayed away from using TikTok for the longest time because I thought it was just kids making dance videos or whatever. I even downloaded it at one point. I got in there for 5 seconds, and then I was like, yeah, I don't get it. And then I deleted the app. I wasn't willing to take the time to just play around with it and actually learn how to use it or how it could be beneficial to me and my business. So fast forward to today, when I've been active on the app for over 2 months now, and because I was willing to not only learn a new technology, but also learn how to put myself out there by making videos about books and writing, I now have almost 1,000 followers. That is way more than I have built up on Instagram or Twitter for followers. And I never would have learned that TikTok is such a great platform to connect with readers and other authors had I not actually taken the time to at least learn what it was and how it worked. And now I'm addicted, so maybe be careful of TikTok. But as Joanna said, things are changing so quickly, right? Especially with technology, that it's important to our success in whatever business that we're doing to be willing to jump in and try new things, learn new technology, try new software. And keep in mind that just because you learn how to use a new piece of technology or software or, social media platform, that doesn't mean that you actually have to use it. But at least you'll be informed about it, which means it might be helpful, down the road, and you'll be prepared for that when it is useful for you. The other point that Joanna made that I wanted to reiterate is the idea of how creative entrepreneurs need to have two hats in order to really build a successful business. One hat is the creative crafting hat. When you wear this hat, you are creating your art, whether it's writing, sculpting, painting, playing music, organizing, whatever your particular art is. You've got your creative hat on when you're in the midst of that creation. However, when it's time to think about what to actually do with that piece of art, that's when we need to put on our business hat. For me, switching hats actually starts partially in the editing process. As much as I might love a passage that I've written in a book, if it doesn't move the story along and make a finished product that readers will actually keep devouring, then I need to cut that passage. And honestly, I don't think that I would be able to do that. I wouldn't be able to cut that piece of writing if I was still wearing my creative hat. In fact, if I'm wearing my creative hat, I tend to add more stuff to the manuscript that doesn't belong. Other business hat activities, as Joanna said, could involve things like marketing or managing your business finances. Now, don't get me wrong, you could potentially be creative when conducting these business hat activities too, like developing an innovative marketing plan for your product. But for me, I can't do it the other way, right? I can't wear my business hat while being creative because that tends to stifle my activity or it leads it down the wrong path. Like if I'm wearing my business hat while I'm writing, my characters suddenly start doing stuff that doesn't really make sense for their story because I'm thinking that they're doing what the reader wants them to do instead of what the character would actually do. And when I notice this, I have to actually stop myself from writing and kind of get back into that sort of creative zone rather than that sort of business-minded zone. So if you're building a creative entrepreneur business, keep this in mind. As I mentioned in the interview with Joanna, what works for me is to split my day into writing in the morning, then switching to my business hat in the afternoon and focusing on marketing or whatever else needs to be done. But it took a little trial and error to actually get there, to kind of figure out that this is what worked for me. So try out a few different methods to see what works for you. Maybe every other day is a creativity day, and then the days in between are for your business hat activities. Try a few different methods, see what works for you. And have patience with yourself as you kind of figure out what is the best method for your personality. All right, listeners, I hope that you guys enjoyed today's show and the interview with Joanna. Join me in 2 weeks on May 3rd for a solo show where I'll focus on how sometimes shit just happens. Until then, go find out. Thanks for listening to the show today. I hope you found the information beneficial and that it helps you tackle your own go find out goals. You can find more episodes and the show transcripts at gofindoutpodcast.com. You can also let me know what you thought of the show by tweeting me at GFOpodcast or follow me on Instagram at gofindoutpodcast. That's it for today. Now go find out.